Are you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we are the Quantum Mechanics, the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everyone in between. We're back. Summer's over. Peter's back from his travels.
Yes, I know it's, well, I guess we haven't been away in terms of the podcast episodes, but yes, we have been away a couple of weeks without recording, so it's going to be interesting. We'll see if we're rusty or reinvigorated.
It was like being on summer holidays.
It really was, wasn't it? And I was literally on summer holidays. I was in the south of France. I have to say, Ben, the weather there was Dante's Inferno on the demon scale.
Infinite demons.
So hot. It was like 37 degrees. It was crazy.
We had some thunderstorms.
Yeah. Well, today it's now autumn. It's not summer anymore. So.
Yeah. No, it isn't. It isn't. It's Halloween next month.
Oh God.
Yeah. As I was driving over, I was thinking, oh, it's that time of year again where we need to come up with a Halloween episode.
Oh God, yeah, we'll have to start thinking about that.
Yeah.
We always do that, you know, it should be our biggest time of the year, right? We always get to the week before Halloween and one of us goes, Halloween next week, we need to do something. It's always last minute. Yes, no meticulous planning where the quantum mechanics are concerned.
Well, hopefully we're doing a location record in a couple of weeks. That's taken some meticulous planning.
Yeah, well, maybe we could put that out on Halloween. Maybe that'd be an idea.
Yeah. Well, with any luck, James from the Lawmen will be with us, so we might have some stuff that we can put out. We can all put out.
Yeah, lovely, great.
And just before we get into the episode, Ellen and Ket, our new patrons. I never know how you say it. I'm going to say patrons.
I always say Patreons.
Yeah, I don't know if that's correct, but thank you so much for joining us. It makes, as ever, a huge difference.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's amazing. We really appreciate it. And if anyone else there wants to join us with the Patreon program, what we do tend to do is put the episodes out a little bit early for Patreons, and we do little news and basic updates during the week as well. So if you fancy a bit of that, go to patreon.com/TQM pod and check it out.
Absolutely. Oh, and also, if you would like to leave a review, somebody gave us a lovely review on Wednesday. Thank you so much. It made coming back to school all the more worth it.
Yeah, it really did. It was a lovely review. Thank you very much for that. And everyone who continues to do that. It really does warm our hearts. Thank you.
And the algorithms.
And it warms our hearts and the algorithms. Yes. I love that. Well, Ben, being away on holiday gave me the perfect opportunity to catch up on some reading. And it gave me time to digest a book I've really wanted to read for a while after someone recommended it to me. So my plan wasn't necessarily to do it for the episode, but I thought I'll just read it on holiday and see where we go. And it's incredible. And it is really worth checking out. The book is called, it's the one I'm going to talk about today. The book is called Haunted: The Incredible True Story of a Canadian Family's Experience Living in a Haunted House. I mean, not the snappiest of titles, but it does what it says in it.
They never are in the paranormal universe. Yeah. They never are. Let me tell you, I've got some scientific papers for you next week. Some of the titles are as long as the actual blooming thing. But this is exciting. So what is this, a new book out, or has it been out for a while?
It's been out for a couple of years, but somebody recommended it because I was like, I really want to do or want to read a good haunted house story while I'm away on holiday, and somebody said, there's a really good true one from Canada that's worth a read. So I thought, yeah, as usual with these things, I thought, well, I'll just feature it as a little story in a bigger episode, but there's so much in it that I'm going to stick with the one book. It's so good. So yeah, Haunted: The Incredible True Story of a Canadian Family's Experience Living in a Haunted House. It's written by Dora L. Williams. And as the title suggests, it is the true story of one family who bought a Victorian-style family home, and their experience of living in the property they soon found was plagued with paranormal activity.
Exciting.
Now, spoiler alert, if you are reading this book or plan to read it, we are going to talk about some of the themes in it. So up to you. We're just letting you know we're going to cover some of the stuff in the book if you are reading it. The book really struck me for a number of reasons, but the two main reasons one, the level and variation of activity the family encountered in this house. And secondly, the fact the book is a first-person account written by the mother of the family that lived in the house itself. So it's not somebody kind of featuring the case. It comes from the people who actually lived in the home.
So, yeah, because quite often it's like the family don't want to talk about it, and in comes somebody to try and get to the truth.
Yeah.
And I put that in air quotes, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the book deliberately doesn't give the location of the house other than telling us that it's in a small town in Canada. I think that's done to protect the occupants of the property, which makes sense. And with that in mind, names have been changed to protect people's identities. But it
Did they change the name of the ghost?
Yeah, to Mr. Claypole.
Target audience.
Old ref. Now, weirdly, this true story starts almost like a horror movie, like the tropes from a horror movie. So its family end up buying a Victorian-era house for a surprisingly low price, and the property has been unexplainably on the market for some time.
Oh, how inexplicable is that? Yeah.
We've had that a few times, right?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, you know it's illegal to sell a known haunted house in America. I wonder if that's the same in Canada.
Yeah, I wonder, because you have to put a little sign up, don't you?
Yeah, you have to declare it. Yeah, because it was it was proved in a court case where somebody claimed that they would have got it cheaper had they known it was haunted, and the judge agreed, and some money had to be refunded.
Wow. Well, this family got it for a song, but they didn't know it was haunted. What is really interesting is that the family, the mum, the dad, and there's 3 kids, they weren't even looking to buy a house. And it seems they bought it on a whim or a compulsion. So let's talk about that a little bit, because that's kind of the start of the book. So the family had not long bought their existing home, and they'd previously owned Victorian properties, and they basically became fed up with the amount of work and upkeep, so they bought a more modern home so they didn't have to bother with that. So literally, they were living in a house that they just bought. But they were driving around the neighbourhood where they live, and they saw this Victorian-era house was having an open viewing day. Not something we really do in Britain, is it, that?
No, not... I mean, I have seen it in... You know those ones that they advertise in Savills that have got 42 bedrooms and the stables? Right. I think sometimes I've seen it there, but no, for your average Joe buying, a 4-bedroom family house, not so much. No.
Yeah. Well, the husband in this story, Ted, they're driving around. They see that this thing's having an open viewing day. Ted suddenly stops the car and just says, "Shall we have a look?" Now, his wife, Dora, was not particularly keen. Like I said, they were not looking for a house. And it was Canada, right? In winter, the weather was absolutely freezing. And she didn't want to go and have a look at the house. It sounds weird to us here, but even just parking up outside, the mother was like, "I'm going to have to put all the kids in their snowsuits. We're all going to have to get wrapped up warm, and then we're going to have to walk into this house to have a look round." So she thought it was pointless to go and have a look at it, but the husband just said, "Oh, come on, let's go and have a look." They basically join the other people walking around for this open viewing. And what's really interesting, Ben, and we may come onto it in a little while in a bit more detail, their reluctance almost instantly turned into kind of obsession and compulsion. Now, remember, they had only moved house within the last 2 years. They'd brought this new house because they didn't want the hassle and the upkeep of an old kind of Victorian-style property. And this house was an old Victorian property that seemed to have been empty for a number of years, and it just needed extensive repairs and work. The other thing, it was also smaller than the house that they currently owned, which is just so weird. But
was it in a more convenient location?
No, pretty much a few blocks away from the house that they owned already.
Wow.
Now, reading the mother's account in the book, they kind of almost instantly fell in love with the place and had a compulsion to own it. And then after a second private viewing, they considered the incredibly low price that the current owners were asking for, and they just put in an offer. So Dora says, "It would later seem incredible to us that we even considered such a move at that point in our lives. Everyone we knew thought we had lost our minds and didn't hesitate to tell us so. Why would we want to move into an old money pit?" So, Ben, when I was reading, this isn't in the book, but it struck me when I was reading these opening sections, and it was a theme that I kept thinking about throughout the book. It reminded me of something we talked about in the last episode we recorded. It felt like the house itself had glamoured them.
Right.
And it is a theme that continues throughout the book. So I'm going to come back to it. The book doesn't kind of make any deal of this, but I was thinking it all throughout reading it. And you'll see why when I get to it. Firstly, this fact that they didn't want to buy a house. They definitely didn't want to buy an old Victorian house. They definitely didn't want to buy an old Victorian house that was smaller than the house that they already lived in, but they ended up putting an offer in on this place. Well, their offer was accepted. They sold their current property and then they moved into this Victorian house. The description of the house, Ben, also has a lot of horror movie type tropes. You'll love this. There is a doorway in one of the bedroom that leads to an attic which has been boarded up and the room has been locked off.
Right. I mean, no.
It's the only room in the whole house that has that.
Okay.
Another bit of a trope, their dog, who in their old house would generally sleep in a bedroom with either the children or the mum and dad, blatantly refused to go upstairs, full stop.
Right, okay. It's time to leave.
Yeah. And one of the first strange encounters they had happened pretty much as soon as they moved in. So Dora, the mum, had hired cleaners to thoroughly clean the property, and she'd inspected the work closely. She was happy. But she says, in her words, when Cammy, who's their younger daughter, came in, she was greeted by a lucky sign. She found coins lying in the middle of the floor and on the windowsills and countertops, and she went around the rooms picking them up. When the other children realised what Cammy was doing, they too joined in the treasure hunt. I was surprised at the number of coins they collected. Dora insists these coins were not there after she had just inspected the house.
Coins seem to come up quite a lot in haunted houses.
Yeah, and this sudden appearance of them. And as we run through the story, there's so much phenomena in this that, there's just a little bit of everything. But the next thing they noticed were strange sounds and smells. Again, we've had this before. All members of the family heard footsteps running up and down the stairs, often when there was only one of them in the house.
Right, yeah.
They all smelled the scent of baking bread and cookies being cooked.
Oh, so it is nice smells.
Yeah. But no one was baking, but they often smelled that. And I started to think about glamoured again. You know what I mean? These lovely smells coming through the house, bread, coins being put out. It almost felt a bit, again, the book doesn't go into this, but it always felt as if the house was trying to make everyone kind of, I don't know, at home or settle in. So the family thought these things were strange, but they didn't seem scared by them, almost immediately accepting them as a quirk of the house. Dora describes just getting used to the sound of footsteps running up and down the stairs and just ignoring it. But it did make Dora do some research on the history of the property. Now, she did a lot of research and goes into detail in the book, but just to summarise, so, this is a real kind of whistle-stop tour of what she says. Again, very tropey. The house had multiple occupants over the years, many only staying for a few months before moving out. The majority of people who lived in the house were out-of-towners. The owners who had the property for longer periods would rent it out rather than live there themselves, and again, the turnover of renters was extremely high. Now, Dora looked into whether there was a history of hauntings, unusual events or tragedies connected with the property, but she found nothing. She did quite a lot of research, the kind of classic thing, going back through newspaper archives and looking through reels of film and she really got into it. So after a few weeks, the family experienced its first apparition. Now, the family's youngest child, who was preschool age, she came running into the house from the yard saying, "There's a pretty girl in my bedroom. I saw her. She was standing at the window in my bedroom and she waved at me."
Eek.
Yeah. Rosa would mention seeing the girl on multiple occasions over the next few months. Now, I guess it's easy to write off these sightings as a young child's vivid imagination. And the kind of mother did. She was kind of understanding, saying, I'm sure you saw something, but I think deep down she just thought, it's a kid kind of fantasizing. She just changed house. But then the mother herself, Dora, had her own encounter. Now, this starts by seeing, when I read the description, to be like a shadow person. But the apparition became clearer. Dora describes this apparition as an extremely tall woman wearing a cape, this is spooky, floating several inches above the floor.
Oh, no.
So there is some debate whether this kind of entity looks like a nurse or a nun, but they never go into detail of that. Now, what's interesting about this encounter is the mixture of detail and lack of detail she describes. Let me just explain that. So the apparition was wearing some kind of hat, like I said, like an old nurse's cap. That's what Dora thought, or possibly a nun's habit. She described seeing each strand of hair and the old style clothing, but there was no face. It was just a dark void.
That's the description I hate the most.
Yeah, really scary, right? Unsurprisingly, this encounter makes Dora wonder if they should sell their house.
Yes, probably yes.
And then we get back to this theme that I picked up on about the glamoured. So a few days after this, Dora is lying awake in bed. She's got her eyes closed and she feels something pat her hand. She describes it as like a comforting way. And she says that the next day she woke up with a feeling of peacefulness and all thoughts of selling the house had gone.
She's being manipulated.
Sounds like it, doesn't it? Yeah. So rather than sell the house, they started their renovation and building work. They built an extension, put in a shed in the backyard. Now, during this work, the builders and the children start unearthing some strange buried objects. Again, there's a lot of detail about this, but basically they find an old jar with an antique button in it. They find an old inkwell and this large piece of quartz rock, which is covered in initially what they think is gold, but actually it turns out to be fool's gold. And during the period of the construction work and the renovation, the paranormal activity in the house just ramps up another notch. This is so weird. Fire alarms in the house start going off in the middle of the night, generally at 3 a.m. The smoke alarms would go off in different rooms on different nights. They tried replacing the batteries and at one point completely changed the alarm system, but they kept going off at 3 a.m.
Always 3 a.m.
Now, over a 6-month period, the alarms would go off a total of 19 times between 3 a.m. and 3:10 a.m.
Wow. I love the fact, of course you would go and replace the batteries, but, you must do it with a sense of, this probably isn't going to work. It's obvious what's going on, isn't it?
Yeah, you think so, but again, this is where this kind of glamouredness comes in.
Right, yeah. Actually, the touch of the hand, that was, re-glamorising, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And again, this is not something the book suggests. It's just something I thought about while I was reading it. So I could be completely off kilter with it. But maybe it was because we had discussed it the week before. But that struck me all the way through reading this book. They just kind of accepted this. It became a kind of normal. Dora describes feelings of relief when a night would go by without the alarms going off. And one night, after one of the alarms had gone off, their son Matt called out to his mother saying there'd been a lady sitting on his bed looking at him. So this Matt is the one who lives in the room now that was boarded up, that has the thing to the attic. No. And again, so this is where the glamouring might come in. You would think, like, a young boy might go, I don't want that room. It's bloody scary. But he almost insisted he wanted that room. He loved it. He kind of fell in love with it and, just wanted to be in there.
Yeah, with my two friends.
Yeah. So he describes, what he describes is pretty identical to the woman that Dora had seen. A apart from this time, so it was this tall woman. Apart from this time, Matt was able to describe her face, so it wasn't this dark void. It did actually have a face. There starts to be a bit of change in Dora's attitude at this point. She tries speaking to the entities in the house, warning them not to scare the children. And activity then seems to focus on their son, Matt, and his bedroom. Yep, the one with the stairs to the attic that was originally boarded up.
Man alive.
So his bedroom door keeps opening by itself, and the room would suddenly become freezing cold. He would hear footsteps coming down from the attic. Oh, God. So there is a bit of time where he kind of moves out of the room and tries to stay in his mum and dad's room, but again, he's quite keen to get back in there. They try putting the dog in with Matt, and the pooch was really having none of it. It didn't want to go in there, and they kind of almost closed the dog in with Matt, and they had to let it out because it was just scratching at the door to get out.
If that happens, just leave. I mean, the dog knows, obviously.
Yeah, the dog's got some sense of what's going on. Now, remember, this is a dog that would quite happily sleep with either the kids or the mum and dad in their old property, but basically he confines himself to downstairs now. So it feels like this house, then it felt like the house got into its own kind of pattern. So they described that during the day, things would be completely normal, but then as soon as everyone would asleep, things would kick off. The house then starts to have major electrical problems. So all of the kids have got these lamps. They start randomly flickering on and off. Now, I say randomly, Dora, in conversation with a friend, describes the pattern, and the friend believe it's actually Morse code, that it's blinking out SOS.
Was that real, or do they just imagine that?
No, so Dora goes, it follows this pattern. It's like, I can't remember what SOS is, but it's like dot, dot, dash, dash, dot, dot. Mm-hmm. So she describes, I think she describes to her friend, like, there's one quick flash, then there's a longer one, and the friend goes, well, I know Morse code, that's SOS.
Oh, I see.
This is also incredibly spooky. The kids have these musical snow globes and jewellery boxes. I think you can see what's coming.
I think so.
They start randomly playing out their tunes in the middle of the night, including, I found this, my hairs at the back of my neck when they described this. One of them plays Away in a Manger. Can you imagine? Because you know those little music box sounds with Away in the Manger at 3 a.m. just got off. Oh my God!
No.
Objects would go missing, then reappear in random places. This is freaky as well. Their daughter Cammy describes her doll moving its arms and legs on its own.
Why? I mean, I know we've tried to explain that in the past, but what is it about dolls? It's just a piece of plastic that's shaped like a human. Why does it? I don't know. You know what I'm going to say? Is like they're either messing or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you're going from a non-skeptical point of view, you might go, it looks like a human form, so if you're going to possess something, why not a doll?
Yeah.
I guess, but I don't know. Well, after talking with a friend, Dora, who I don't think was overly religious, but had some religious belief, she decides to put up crosses in the house and pictures of angels in the kids' bedrooms. Dora also consults a medium after doing some research online. So she again, not a big fan of the paranormal, but she started going online and going, who can I talk to help me? And there is some debate about whether at this point, there's a big debate in the book about whether the apparitions were residual hauntings, so some kind of stone tape theory, rather than full apparitions. Dora's not so sure about that, and any doubt that she had was laid to rest after she started to interact with the entities in some strange ways, which I'm going to go into. It starts with Dora putting up a picture in her husband's bedroom, in her and her husband's bedroom, I should say. Now, she misplaces the nail. She was like, she kind of got the picture out, she got a nail, she got a hammer, can't find the nail, and then suddenly a different nail materialises.
A different one?
Yeah. This one is unlike the new nail she had intended to use. This one was old, long, and rusty. She describes it as just appearing in front of her eyes. Freaky.
Yeah, that's we've heard of object replacement and object sort of apportation, but you don't often get to see it. It's normally like lands in front of you, or you discover it on the floor, but she actually sees it appear.
Well, she says materialised in front of her eyes. I guess that word could be doing some heavy lifting. You know, you could maybe describe it that way if you kind of look away and look back and it's there, rather than see it kind of, do you know what I mean? Almost teleport into existence. I'm cloudy as to whether it's which one of those it is, whether it just suddenly appears and she hadn't noticed it, or she saw it almost like the TARDIS appearing in Doctor Who. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Then a ghostly young boy starts materialising. Now, this entity's behaviour, Ben, is a bit more poltergeist-like to me. It runs around the house, it makes noises, it hides objects in strange places. And again, I had this feeling of them being glamoured, because Dora says, "I found nothing terrifying or threatening about him. He was apparently only the spirit of a child who was no longer alive."
So, but they see him physically?
They see him, yeah. Different members of the family.
Right, okay.
Now, there is a weird bit where Dora believes this ghostly child starts playing around with their stereo system. This is quite weird. She said the stereo suddenly turned itself on by itself and randomly started playing a compilation CD that they had in the stereo. It started playing track 11, which happened to be Spirit in the Sky.
Okay, that is weird.
That's very poltergeisty, isn't it?
It's very poltergeisty, yeah. And also gives us a time frame of when this happened, like about 1987, I'm thinking.
Yeah, so because it doesn't actually give a date, but there's internet of some level.
Oh, is there? Oh, right, so it's 90s then. Probably.
Yeah, and there's CD players, so yeah, I think it's got to be 90s. Now, it's fair to say, up until this point, most of the activity had centred around Dora and the children, with the husband, Ted, kind of acknowledging that weird things were happening, but always trying to find a logical explanation for what was going on. So he was kind of going, yeah, some weird stuff's happening, but there's got to be a logical explanation. So he's not really buying into all this paranormal stuff at this point. For Dora and the kids, they had gone from initially being freaked out to either accepting what was happening, and at times it felt even finding some enjoyment in it. So, you know, things appearing, disappearing. Certain bits of the book made me think about the scene in Poltergeist, the original movie, you know, where the mother and daughter are playing with the poltergeist and being propelled across the kitchen floor and going, "Come and have a look at this, it's amazing, it's amazing."
Yeah.
There are bits in the book that are a bit like that, do you know what I mean, where they seem to be enjoying what's going on. But things started to change for Dora after an incident in the middle of the night. She wakes up to see a young ghostly girl standing on the other side of the bed that's just staring at her husband, Ted. The girl was wearing old, possibly Victorian clothing. This bit really struck me in the book, and it really started making me thinking. There's a wonderful description of, apart from this thing being a shocking sight, there's something else that really struck me. Dora describes how she'd seen images of people in Victorian dress, in grainy black and white photos, how she'd seen these kind of translucent images of ghosts as well. But she said this apparition was in bright, vivid colour. And she describes it, was, in my mind, as almost being like ultra high definition, because she can see every detail of the hair and everything, and there's blonde hair and the colours of the clothing. I thought that was incredibly powerful. It really struck with me because you, again, Victorian era, you don't really see it in colour unless you're kind of seeing a movie recreation. Yeah. And ghosts, you don't think of ghosts like this. This thing was almost hyper real.
I'm thinking of the library ghost in Ghostbusters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, this ghostly girl reaches out a hand to touch Ted, the husband's face, and Dora tries to wake him up. which this apparition does not appreciate one bit.
Oh.
Dora describes the look the ghost gives her. That movement, though subtle, alerted the girl to me watching her, and she slowly turned and looked at me for several seconds with a blend of frustration and irritation. She was obviously unhappy that I had disturbed her. The girl's obvious irritation terrified me. The look she gave me made me feel as if I was an intruder in my own home.
Maybe she is.
Yeah, maybe she is. So Dora decides at this point that enough is enough. And she gets back in contact with the paranormal investigator to figure out what they can do about these ghostly encounters. And there's a weird bit in that as well. There's this amazing bit where she tries to compose an email to the investigator, but every time she's typing, the computer keeps glitching and deleting what she's typing. And then the computer just finally crashes altogether before she can send the email.
That sounds familiar. That sounds, the poltergeist and ghosts interfering with electrical stuff is pretty common. But to do it specifically, it's like she's, rather than just messing with the electrics, it feels like it's actually trying to do something deliberate there.
Yeah, trying to delete the message that she's writing saying, I need some help. How am I going to deal with these ghosts? Well, a few days later, Dora does get to send the email. And the paranormal investigator gives her some initial advice. Now, during this period, Dora describes activity ramping up again to a new level. She describes unusual activity now happening on a daily basis. So basically everything that we've detailed so far is basically happening all the time. Now, the paranormal investigator informs Dora that the objects that were dug up from the back garden may be creating or at least exacerbating the activity, and she advises Dora to rebury them where she found them, or as close to where she found them as she could, because they've obviously done some building work there now. And strangely, this seems initially to work, and the activity in the house settles down. But sightings then seem to then go outside the house, so there seems to be some link between these objects. So the daughter and the mother, Dora, see a tall blonde woman outside the house who's obviously a ghost. This figure was also seen by neighbours as well, who said, who's that strange woman in the strange clothes standing outside your house?
Glowing.
Yeah. And it's worth pointing out at this point, they didn't talk to any neighbours about this. You know, there's lots in the book about how Dora said, well, what am I going to say to them? You know what I mean? They're going to think we're completely nuts. We've recently moved in and we're doing all this stuff. Now, the weird activity didn't end there. But what's really interesting, this is a weird sentence I'm going to say, but it starts to become initiated by Dora herself, either kind of semi-deliberately or subconsciously, which again made me think of Glamored, and you see what I mean by this. And this point leads to some of the weirdest activity in this remarkable story. There's a couple of things coming up which I've just never heard before. It's just amazing. So one day Dora is sitting on the porch when she gets this really strong image, almost like a retrocognition comes into her mind. She gets the image of a man sitting on the porch where she's sitting, reading an old-style newspaper. But in this image, the porch is actually painted red. It's brown at the moment, but the porch is red. So she decides to go to the kitchen, get a knife, and scrape away at the floor of the porch. And she goes through layers and layers of paint in various colours until she finally scrapes off a layer that shows the porch had indeed been painted red. This is the weird bit. She then has this compulsion, it's almost like a desire, to read the actual paper the man in the vision was reading. Doesn't kind of explain why, but she just says this overwhelming urge to read it. So she goes around the house to see if there might be any old newspapers in the house, even though she'd explored and cleared everything out, every nook and cranny. But she finds nothing. And then something incredibly bizarre happens. Dora describes it herself. As we walk towards the house, A newspaper had materialised right in front of our eyes. It had not been there one moment, but was definitely there the next. The paper was spread out as though it was being read on the front lawn beside the porch stairs. When Dora and her daughter examined the newspaper, it said at the top, "The Mail and Empire, Toronto, Thursday, August 17th, 1933. Isn't that amazing?
That is amazing. Wow.
She said this ancient newspaper looked brand new, no signs of aging at all. She describes it as being in mint antique condition. She says, "I realised it had only been a few hours earlier that I sat at that spot and wished for that very experience." Now, this newspaper was not the full paper, it was just 5 pages. And again, Dora gets this weird compulsion. She wishes it was the whole paper. And she then gets the urge to look under the porch. And lo and behold, she finds another mint condition newspaper from the 1930s.
This is direct communication, isn't it?
And there are pictures of these papers in the book and the nail. There's some various pictures that are at the back of the book. So, yeah, worth checking those out.
So is there anything stand out from these newspapers, or is it just a date setting, or is there some content?
Well, there is. I'll come on to that. There is some content, but they never quite get to what that is. And I'll come on at the end about, in some ways, that gave some credibility for me to the story. So these papers, the whole family saw and started reading these papers. Remember, these are in perfect condition, as if they were printed this morning. And even the sceptical husband couldn't explain it away. Now, the photos that are in the book, Dora says that the paper conditions degenerated by the time the photos were taken. So that she said it kind of aged quickly over a period of days. But the one that was the 5-pager, if you look at the photo, it still looks in incredibly amazing condition, considering it must have been, 70, 80, 90, whatever years old. So through a friend, Dora talks with a medium who does say that there must be something important in both papers. And this medium gets this vision of, you need to look on page 5, both papers, look on page 5. So there's a whole thing where because she describes, it's really interesting, she describes the amount, and we've seen it with old papers, the amount of text that is on one page. You know what I mean? It's not like now where you've got, it's crammed full of stuff. So they go through everything, through the adverts to see if there's any kind of connection. Now, the only thing they can find that seems like a clue that ties these two separate papers together are stories about World War. In one of the papers, there's a story about World War One, another about World War Two, but it's never really you never really get to a conclusion of what this newspaper was trying to say or what its purpose was. So it remains a bit of a mystery even after you finish reading the book.
Right.
Yeah, they start asking the spirits to give them clues to the significance of the newspaper. And there's some weird flickering light that goes on, which the sceptical husband writes off. One of the papers starts to degenerate, but one story is still readable, the one about World War. Oh. So that feels like a hint. Again, I'm not sure, but that's what they kind of infer in the paper.
Oh, it's always so frustrating. It's like, if you can manifest newspapers and coins, why can't you just write a short note explaining what you're trying to say?
Tell us.
Yeah.
And there is another bizarre incident that happens. So Dora is saying to her husband, look, you got to believe now. And he's still being skeptical about the whole thing. Oh, and she says to her husband, what will it take to convince you? I wish something else would happen specifically to you that would prove to you this is real.
Okay. That seems like a dangerous thing to...
Yeah. And Ben, You're going to like this. This leads to a really bizarre haunted beer incident.
Haunted beer?
Yes. So just after Dora makes this comment, Ted, her husband, opens a bottle of beer and it explodes all over his face.
We've all been there.
Yeah. Ted believes this is his family playing a practical joke on him. And so he gets another beer out of the fridge. Exactly the same thing happens.
Don't open it by your face.
Yeah. Now, I guess a skeptic might say that Ted had just bought a kind of batch of badly shaken up beers, right?
Yeah.
But Dora goes on to say, from that day on, Ted was unable to enjoy a bottle of beer in his home. If we were drinking a bottle anywhere else, nothing unusual would occur. But he attempted to drink a beer in the house or anywhere on our property, he would be assured it would shoot right into his face. It would not erupt when the cap was removed or when he might expect it to, but only when his guard was down.
Oh, that's so cool.
Isn't that great?
Oh, what a great way of cutting down on your drinking.
Yes.
I mean, I would say put it in a glass.
Yeah. Good point.
I'm using my microphone-friendly bottle here with a little cap. I could put it in that and have a little sip.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I suppose we're not looking at solutions for drinking haunted beer. But that is amazing. But why is the ghost just trying to deliver... I mean, he asked for a message. He's being delivered a message.
Yeah.
But, again, is that the only way? Like, what a strange thought process. I know, I'm going to throw beer in his face. I'm not going to, like, sit in front of him and, like, do something so astounding that he can't possibly deny it. No, I'm going to throw beer in his face.
Well, there is a loose connection, which I'll come on to with the beer, but there's a bit where they try and tie up some of these loose ends, and I'll come on to it. But for me, it was a little bit grasping at straws. So I'll mention it in a while, and you can see what you think. But in case you were wondering, Ben, there was a happy ending to the horrific paranormal beer incident. I'm happy to inform you that after a couple of months, Ted finally admitted that something very weird and paranormal was happening in the house. And Dora says, and that was all it took. There was never another eruption.
Oh, I thought you were going to say, like, moved on to spirits or something. Like, have a whiskey.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, well, it did its job then.
Yeah, and you've picked up on a theme. It seems like whatever was haunting the house was either trying to communicate with them or trying to help them sometimes or just kind of have some fun. And talking of helping them, this is amazing. There's a weird incident where there's this large mirror that's on the wall that falls off, and it could have crushed one of the children, but seemed to be invisibly held at 30-degree angle, preventing it from landing on one of the children.
Ah, okay.
Now, when Dora and Ted kind of run and get there and hold the mirror, they notice at the top there are two small child handprints on the mirror. Oh. As if there was this small invisible child had held it up there until they'd got there.
Yeah.
And they say that after that moment, handprints would then appear or disappear on numerous windows and mirrors. So there's small child's, and they were smaller handprints than any of the children that actually lived in the house, the real children.
Right.
They would kind of clean off the handprints, and then, within a few minutes they'd be back, or the next day they'd be back. So after a few months, the apparitions started again. In addition to the regular visitors, the tall woman and various other ones, they started seeing a small, sad boy they describe in rags with skin that was a funny yellow colour. Rosa, one of the daughters, describes regularly seeing two angels in her room, but the description sounds almost like a boy and a girl rather than, an angel with wings. I think it's just her description. Then weird things start happening with telephone calls. Again, we've had this before, right? The phone starts ringing pretty much constantly day and night. When they pick up the other end of the phone, no one's there. Weirdly, it includes an antique phone that they had, which was not even connected to the phone system. It would start ringing.
Yeah, we've heard that before, yeah.
After all this new activity, Dora finally decides that it's time to leave the house. Dora and Ted start to look for properties online, and once again, the internet fails. They finally put the house on the market, and a real estate agent says that they have a buyer who wants to come and see the property. But the new buyer is concerned that sometimes these old properties are prone to flooding in the basement, and can the family assure them there are no issues there? And Dora's able to confidently inform the estate agent they'd never had a problem. You guessed it, Ben. The family wake up on the morning of the viewing to find the basement completely flooded.
I have been there, but not through paranormal means. But oh no, that's awful.
Well, you've had your paranormal fabric conditioner.
I've had my paranormal fabric conditioner, yes.
Interestingly, Dora kind of appeals to the spirits to not mess this up for them. She has a kind of chat with them. Reminded me of Ghost, the comedy thing.
Oh, yeah.
Just behave yourself. And lo and behold, this is amazing, as the new prospective buyers arrive, Dora goes into the basement, it's bone dry.
Oh, nice ghosts.
Yeah.
Oh.
So it all looks like the sale's going through, right? At this point, Dora does start to feel some guilt. A little bit at not informing the new owners about the occurrences in the house, but that's not really her main motivation. Because she kind of goes, well, what would I tell them? And again, this feels a bit like this glamour theme I've been picking up on, as Dora seems more concerned about the impact selling will have on the entities in the house. She says, I felt somewhat irrational feelings of sadness and guilt at the thought of leaving. I almost felt as if we would be abandoning the spirits, especially those children who are attached to the location and perhaps somehow lost. It felt impossible to simply move away from the house without doing something to help the spirits do the same. Medium gets involved at this point and starts to make connections with a fire. He says that, there'd been a fire on the property. He says that could explain why the fire alarms keep going off. He says a family may have been killed in the fire, possibly by their alcoholic father, accidentally causing the fire when drunk. So then he makes a connection with the beer incident.
Right, yeah.
Telling the father not to get drunk, not to drink. Again, I don't know, it feels could be a bit kind of cold reading and just making the facts work for you. I don't know. That's how I felt when I read it.
Right.
Anyway, Dora takes some more advice and decides to clean the house, spiritually speaking, of course. Mm-hmm. It's time for the old white sage. It's time for big sage.
The power of big sage.
Yeah. So after performing the cleaning ritual, which basically her and Ted do themselves, there's quite a lot. I was thinking about this. There's quite a lot where she's talking to paranormal investigators and mediums, and they keep saying, we'll come to the house. And she keeps saying, no, because it's Canada, it's like you live so far away, we can't afford to pay your travel and all that kind of stuff, which felt a little weird to me. But then I guess Canada is a big place, so there might be kind of big. But she, or whether it's just her wanting to keep it to herself and keep control of it herself. But either way, it's her and her husband go and bite the white sage, do all the cleaning stuff, say, it's time to move on, all the stuff that you do. And after they performed the cleaning ritual, the activity completely stopped.
Forever?
Yep.
Oh.
The family decided not to sell the house. In fact, they added a swimming pool to the backyard, and there is a bit of a kind of tying up thing. Interestingly, while they were digging the hole for the pool, they discovered old scorched earth, suggesting there had been a historical fire on the property.
Oh, that's interesting.
But nothing of that was in any records that she could find about the house. But when they dug the pool, they found it. So there is this thing that they felt it might have been somebody squatting or basically living in the house illegally. So why they wouldn't be on records, because it had these periods of being empty for a long time.
I see. And there was nothing that could relate to a fire in that article about the World War One.
No,
piece in the paper.
No, there's no kind of connection that's made back there. But she kind of assumes that it might have been the family, the man she saw on the porch. Maybe I don't know. There is no real direct connection made with the World War articles in the paper. And I don't know, it doesn't say in the book, but it does make me feel the family may still be living there today, or at least when they wrote the book.
Oh, right, okay.
Which again is another reason why they don't want to give the location.
Yeah, of course. It's so odd that it should go away so quickly, but then, like, it's not odd, it's just often something hangs around. It feels like there was nothing malevolent there. It was just trying to communicate.
Yeah, I mean, the scariest thing they had really was, that incident with her husband where she just got a dirty look from a ghost, basically. That's about as scary as it got, apart from, the fact that bizarre stuff is scary. But, I'm not, trying to put down what they're saying, but there was no attacks. There's nothing, well, apart from the odd beer attack in the face. Well, there's not much going on, is there?
You know what you were saying there? So the ghost was trying to perhaps wake the father. Maybe it was testing to see if he was like, drunk to the world. Maybe that's why that's why it gave her a dirty look.
Yeah.
Like she was trying to work out whether he was safe for the family.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I mean, it's an amazing story, Ben, and there were often when we're reading these things, you'll back me up on this. You start to think this all seems too good to be true, don't you?
Yes. Oh, yes.
There were times when I felt like that, but is this some incredible fiction passed off as fact? But there's something about this book that makes me at least maybe just want to believe, but believe. I think if it was fiction passing as fact, I'm not sure it would have been written like it is. I think if you read it, you'll know what I mean. It's quite factual. There's no over-the-top flowery language or purple prose. It feels like it's written by someone it happened to rather than, pardon the pun, a ghostwriter. Now, that could all be some amazing double bluff, but I didn't read it. Like when you read creepypasta and you go, it's creepypasta, you can tell by the way it's written. So even though the story elements are just so amazing, it's not written in that way. So I guess there's three things. It's either true, it's a work of, a hoax worth of fiction written by a bad writer, or it's been deliberately written in a way that kind of makes you feel, no, this is true. But secondly, there's no big reveal that ties everything together, right? The newspaper, the relevance of that is never really established. Apart from the burnt ground, there's no kind of backstory that can be proved through, reading through archives or anything like that about fire. And none of Dora's research into the property throws up anything other than conjecture. There's no history of haunting, weird events there. There's no history of tragedy. Do you know what I mean? So all that kind of gave it credibility to me. If you're writing a hoax story, I'd feel you tie off more of those loose ends at the end. I mean, they do try with the swimming pool and the medium saying, oh, it's the drunk father and all that, but they don't make a big deal of it. And I didn't read it going, oh, wow, there's the smoking gun. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely do. And I think also in fiction, there'd be the temptation to put in a hook, a protagonist throughout, whereas it isn't really. It's just like various touches onto the phenomenon. It's not like there's one sort of guardian of the story, if you see what I mean, which I think also makes it different.
I mean, there's a little bit of that because I think, again, I've not featured it here, but the tall woman with the nurses thing has blonde hair and the child has blonde hair, so there is some suggestion at some point it might be the same person in different stages of their development, as a child and as an adult. But again, it's all very loosely put together that they're not kind of going, it's definitely that. Do you know what I mean? It could be a family. It could be one person, but then there are these other people coming in. There's talk of portals, obviously, with the medium saying it's a portal and maybe many people are coming through. But there is no, like you said, there is no coherent ghostly protagonist, maybe is the way to describe it.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, the things that really stuck with me were that description of the Victorian ghost in vivid colour, almost high definition. That just reading that passage alone made me go, I never thought about that before. And that must be incredibly weird because it's not your stereotypical view of a ghost. And like she said, when you see Victorian people, You know, they're either pictures that are black and white, sepia tone, or have been artificially coloured. So seeing something in almost high definition in vivid colour must be really weird.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And you got to imagine that she definitely saw something. I mean, it's possible you can make that up. Of course it is. People wrote Star Wars, but it feels like an odd thing to put in at that juncture in the book.
Yeah. The incidents with the newspapers, really bizarre. I don't think I've come across anything like that before. I don't know if you have.
No, the only thing that it made me think of was the Doddleston papers, the vertical plane,
Right.
where papers and newspapers and images from them are left on tables and they very quickly age.
Right.
And I've seen that before, but no, not in the same way as you've described.
And the beer incident is kind of funny, poltergeisty, almost ridiculous. But, you know, the fact that I was intrigued because at first when I started reading that bit, I thought, oh, yeah, he's just got a dodgy batch of beer. But the fact that it went on for months and months and months every time he tried.
Yeah,
but you're right. Why wouldn't you just put it in a glass? Maybe he didn't get that far.
Yeah, no, what a great story. And it's one of the few where it's actually a nice outcome. Nobody's like driven to nightmares or anything.
Yeah. Or there's some mass murder at the end. It's almost. Do you know what I mean though about being glamoured and charmed? It almost feels like that.
I do. Yeah, it's like maybe the ghost knew that they needed closure.
Yes. There was something in it for the ghosts if you go with the story.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely give the book a read. It's called Haunted, the incredible true story of a Canadian family's experience living in a haunted house. It's by Dora L. Williams. My Kindle copy cost me £5. I think paperbacks, this is in the UK, paperbacks were about 22 to 25 quid. I think it's also available in the UK on Audible as well, so if you want to listen to it.
Oh, thank you. That's fantastic. I really enjoyed that.
And there is a lot more detail than I've covered today. I know we've covered some kind of key bits, but there is a lot more in the book, so it is well worth a read. Really good.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Thank you. Well, I mean, Sage comes to the rescue. I mean, Sage keeps coming up again and again and again. Obviously, it came up in Nikki's story, the first show we ever did. We keep talking about getting a proper witch in to talk about this.
Yeah, we should do that, because I've got no real strong idea of the kind of background and why it's white sage, why it works, but people swear by it. This episode is brought to you by Big White Sage.
Waitrose.com.
Yeah.
We still haven't had our sponsorship deal from Stadhampton Farm Shop.
We're still trying if you're listening.
Still trying, yeah. Brilliant. Well, I've got something completely different next week. I've started researching it because that's what you do when you get time off. It does intersect, but it's not about hauntings.
Okay, well, I look forward to that. That'll be amazing. Don't think we've got any Sherlock stuff because we've both been kind of away, but if you have any Sherlock Holmes experiences, let us know. I'm desperate to use that music again.
Oh, we got it. We'll use it next week, whichever way. Yeah. Anybody who's had any Sherlock experiences, get them in. We'll do a roundup next week.
Brilliant. Yes, and thank you for listening. If you fancy checking us out on Patreon, like we said, patreon.com/TQM pod. And yeah, keep liking, reviewing. It really helps us. So thank you so much.
And follow us on Twitter and the Facebook.
Yeah, or X now, isn't it?
Oh, X. Yeah,
I keep thinking we must change the logos on our social media sites to the X ones, where it's on our homepage and stuff. I like the old Twitter logo.
I like the old Twitter logo. I'm not a fan of X.
No.
We're not in a James Bond book.
Just in case for algorithms, we are massive fans of X. Ben didn't mean that, honestly. Honestly, Elon, he didn't mean it. We'll see you next week on the Quantum Mechanics. Thanks for listening.
Take care. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?